Good morning. Happy Wednesday. It took a little while to get on this morning. I'm not sure if it's my internet, if there's a lot of traffic on YouTube or whatnot. So, my apologies on being late this morning. But I hope you are all well. It is May 27th. Oh my goodness. That means May is almost over. Can you believe it? We are nearly 6 months into 2026. So, for those of you that just happened upon this podcast, I am Cyndi Thompson. I am the creator of The Creative Connection, where we try to connect with one another, ourselves, and lean into creating lives that we desire to live. For those of you familiar with me, you might notice that my office has switched around a little bit. I realized after many weeks and trying to figure out the best way to have the best light so that my face was not dark when I recorded things, because I'm not only on a podcast, but I do a number of other things where I'm on a video camera. I flipped my office back around. So now I have light coming at me from two windows and overhead. The month of May, we have been going down the path of still small voice inside of our head. We began the month by acknowledging it, by knowing that it was probably calling us to something that we were choosing not to pay attention to. Interestingly enough, I listened to a TED Talk this morning about a woman. Let's see if I can find what I listened to this morning. I listened to, oh goodness gracious, hold on just a second. I listened to Kiki Palmer. Kiki Palmer was a child star. She is now an adult comedian and star, mother, daughter, whatnot. So Kiki Palmer began in the career of acting as a means of survival. And what she shared in her TED Talk this morning was about what happened when she realized she didn't need to be doing this for survival anymore. And that it was time to listen, slow down, rest. That's what we've been talking about today. I think that sometimes we get going on a path and there comes a moment when the whisper or the voice that's been going on inside of us becomes so loud it is impossible to ignore. That's what today's conversation is about. Throughout this month, we've talked about how we realize that the way we are living right now works on the outside, but it's something inside us that still longs for something more, and that awareness is important. But awareness today is about the fact that awareness alone is not going to change that. It's not going to allow us to turn off the mind chatter, the constant poking, the lack of sleep, the choices that we make when we don't choose well to eat, or what we put in our body, or to actually move our body. And while I know this is true for men too, I think many, many women spend years listening inward while quietly waiting for permission to act. That is what today is about. It's about giving yourself permission to act. So let's dive in. So it was last week, it was 2 weeks ago, I shared about the difference between performing or living your life. Hand in hand with that, there is a difference between knowing what you need to do and acting in that manner. Quite often, many of the people that I meet, talk to, work with, walk down a path together, have spent a long time longing before they actually make a move. I have been this month, for those that are new to me, offering a 30 minutes space, safe space for quietening the mind and listening. Because what's interesting is our body knows our brain, our ego, allows us to take the first step. Sometimes our body collapses in exhaustion to wake us up. And our body feels pulled or pushed or split apart, sometimes by the longing for something different, something new, something we don't even know what we need right this moment in time. And quite often, the things that stop us from our mind or our ego are fear. Fear pops up and says, but what will happen if I could get hurt? This is not what I'm used to doing. This is not comfortable for me. And then if you figure out a way to climb out of that pit of fear, then practicality kicks in. Yes, but. And then responsibility. And those two things hand in hand, practicality and responsibility, can cause us to actually stop. Now, quite often, my husband and I have a conversation around the idea of things to do with the rest of our life. And we were raised in different homes. His home was about being practical and responsible and doing the ordinary, to be honest with you. And in my house, my mom and my dad were dreamers, but different kinds of dreamers. My mom dreamed of things, but kept wraps on it with practicality. What was reasonable? What could possibly happen? Whereas my dad dreamt big dreams. If you are familiar with the musical Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, he dreamed big dreams. He dreamed big dreams until, unfortunately, age and dementia stopped those dreams. So I'm a combination of the two of them. There are moments that I will dream big, but then put boundaries around my dreaming to keep it practical, especially if my husband and I have had a conversation and practicality has popped up. But then there are moments where I dream big dreams and I wonder, what if? What if? Could this be? Somewhere in that crossroads, I get insights, or some of us that hang out and are high on the intuition level, or the empath level, or the spiritual level, downloads or insights. And maybe you do too. Maybe there's a little inkling in you about an intuitive thing that you should lean into, something you should try. But I have learned through trial and error, and I'm sure you have too, that insight alone or a spiritual download or a desire to do something changes nothing until it becomes embodied, until you take it fully into your heart, your soul, your belief system. And those embodied insights help us then move down a path to make choices that can help us shift how we live our life. When I began my business in 2021 with the intention of having the title of it be Creating a Passionate Life, I had no idea where that title was coming from. And I think I've shared this before, other than I believe we are all creative beings. Some of us own it, some of us deny it, some of us are afraid of it, some of us lean into it. And that I believe that there were people, now this was 2021. However, I'd had this feeling long before that. People were not passionate about their life. They weren't excited to get out of bed in the morning and take that leap into their day with the intention of creating a space and place and life that they loved living. What I have learned is that many of us, women in particular, I'm going back to women in particular because I work primarily with women. I am a woman. I can relate to that. But there are some, we are all yin and yang. And while I may present feminine on the outside, there are many who present feminine internally, that yin, that softer energy, that flowing energy. But why women can get stuck, dig their feet in, it's this way because some of the reasons why are, and I have been caught in these loops myself, certainty. I don't know if this is going to, there's a level of doubt and uncertainty. Fear of disappointing others. This was huge for me when I was younger. So there was a point in my life I was so trying to be perfect. However, that was such a struggle for me because I would procrastinate to the very last moment, because doing it perfectly or doing it and getting it right and spending time on it was not who I was. What I really wanted was to fight for the underdog. If you are familiar with the Enneagram, the perfectionism is 1. The Enneagram 8, I'm going to go to bat for you, especially if you are the underdog. I am extremely loyal. And I have a tendency to lean towards a 7, which is I want to experience everything. Oh my goodness. Now, that could be a little bit of ADD in there. But I believe that fear of disappointing was grounded not in the perfectionist, but in the loyalty. My mother growing up had a great life until she was 12. And then she had a good life. What happened at the age of 12 was her father passed away suddenly on the way to work one day. And her older brother, 10 years older, had just returned from the war, and he was off in a different state going to university. And her mother found herself alone in a space where there wasn't much family. So they packed their bags and moved to where her brother was. And then my mom had a good life. And my mom lived a good life until her passing in 2017. And she had wanted to be an actor. She, in fact, had professionally acted. She had done many things. And then when she got met with me, she walked away from that career and began teaching. Now, there is a theory about teachers, and I don't know that this is 100% true, because I have known many teachers that is their calling on this planet, is to teach. And I think on a certain level, that actually was my mother's calling. Well, she was a good actor, and she was a good director. She was a fabulous teacher. And I wanted to follow that path. I wanted to be an actor. And to hear my mother say it, I was better than she ever was. I don't know that that's true. I know that I can tell a good story, but I don't know that I am the best actor. But here's what I do know. I am skilled at teaching people to share stories. I am also skilled at seeing the story and making connections that can have an impact and create change in perspective and lives with how we share it. So I have shifted from the acting role to the directing and teaching and community building role. Now, here's the bit about why I got stuck. My mother, well, acting's a great profession, but know that there will be a lot of rejection, and you may not always get what you want. As long as you know this, go ahead, pursue it. And then, of course, my father, who never completed his college degree, but was a fabulous people person. His calling was in relationship building, in starting conversations. He said, if you're going to do that, you need to have a way to make money. So when you are between parts, you can. So he wanted me to be an insurance agent like he had been, or to do something along those lines. And so I tried all of that. I tried the practicality. I went to the University of Washington and I got a degree in psychology, thinking I would be involved in human resources or training and development on my path to. But then I met my husband, fell in love, and my life shifted. And it became more practical. There was a point in time, though, in our journey in relationship as a couple and as two individuals striking out on our paths of career, where is the word I'm looking for? Yeah. Where we got so caught up in the everyday, the mundane of everyday, that I think we were surviving, much like Kiki Palmer spoke about in her TED Talk I listened to. It became about the doing, not the being of who we were, and not paying attention to what our body and our energy and our heart and our spirit was saying to us. And then in that survival mode, in that getting caught in the mundane, we began to want to be better and better at it and sought out perfection. I'm going to be the best at. I want to rise to the top and be the best. Perhaps one of those resonates with you about why you, at times, or maybe even now, have felt stuck. But there are two others that quite often we ignore, or we take the party line. Now, the first one is the party line one, and that is waiting until we are ready. So, when I began this journey of doing what I am doing now, I had been working with an at risk for homeless youth and young adult population. And there were people that crossed my path that wanted to be a musician or wanted to be a playwright or wanted to be a poet. And I began to connect them to people in the greater Seattle community to help them do those things. And I ignored the fact that those were some things I wanted to do. I wanted to teach this. I wanted to create a space and place for people like this to come to me so that I could help them. But I didn't think I was ready. In fact, when I finished my year of service as an AmeriCorps Vista, I went, okay, I want to start this school and I want to take like these people that have come to me and I sent them on to this other space over here. I want to be able to provide to them what I am sending them off to. But I told myself I needed to get a master's in business administration so that I could understand the inner workings of a business. Now, you are probably thinking, you probably should do that. What you don't know is that I had spent the previous 20 years working in businesses where I help them learn how to start and grow their businesses. I knew how to do it. But I lost trust in myself and my ability. I began to second guess myself. And that is why I, for the next 11 years, didn't lean into what I was longing to do and felt called to do. You know, many women become excellent in this surviving mode or this, oh, when I'm ready mode, when they've outgrown the lives that they've been living. You know, there is one thing that I have learned and I have heard repeatedly from others is that the person I am today is not the person I was yesterday. And if I want to be the person that I see for tomorrow, I need to move. I need to learn. I need to lean into the person I am becoming. So I've already started on this idea of where I had been stuck. I had a comfort career and it was in retail leadership. I had been, first of all, I started out as a salesperson when I was 16. By the time I was 17 and a half, I was the manager of a small mom and pop retailer. When I went to college, I ended up running an independent business for a member of the Nordstrom family. And I did that for a year and a half until he made the decision to close it. And then I jumped into another business where then I became the hirer and trainer of that business. Then I got my BA in psychology, thinking I would continue down this path. But at some point in time, I would go back to theater and acting. And at the time, I did not see myself as a director. I love designing, though. I love designing costumes and the set and the lighting. And I loved the design aspect of it. But that's not where I saw myself. I still saw myself on stage. Then I met my husband and we got married and we moved to a small town in Illinois. And our choices at that point in time, my choice for work was the university, which I did not see myself working in a large bureaucratic institution, which as I look back, I think that's quite funny. And you will find out why in a moment. So I got a job waiting tables at the Ramada Inn. But that was only temporary, and I knew it was temporary because I was applying for jobs at the mall. I had good retail background. I had a BA in psychology. I was now hireable to be something at a higher level. I think I worked in that waiting job for, well, almost 2 months. I was the opener at the Ramada Inn, 6 to 2, Monday through Friday. It was a Monday through Friday job. And in September, I guess it was 1 month. In September, I got a phone call from a local department store. There was a small chain based out of Terre Haute, Indiana. Would I be interested in being a manager trainee? Of course. I'd never worked in a department store before. I'd only worked, well, actually, that's not true. Right out of high school, I worked for the Dayton Hudson Company. But I hadn't really delved into the world of department stores. So I was hired as a manager trainee in September, and October I was promoted to department manager of the worst performing department, not only in that store, but in the entire chain of stores. And I thought, okay, what is the challenge here? What is causing this space and place? And so my strategic brain kicked in, and I went on a discovery journey of what was making this not tick. Basically, it was not working. What was not working? Coincidentally, at the same time, I was overweight. I was not healthy. And I thought, you know what? I think I'm going to go on a personal transformation journey. At the same time, I am looking at the journey of this department and see if I can't make us both shift. 1985, the fall of 1985, I started in that position. By March of 1986, I had an entirely new sales staff. I had gotten to know all of my customers, and I had a customer database. Before customer databases were anything, if you know anything about retail. And I had transformed that department from the worst in the department store to the top. I was then offered another promotion within that department store to take on an entire area that was the lowest performing. And could I do the same thing in this larger area? I did. And at the same time, I lost 40 pounds. And it was the first time I cut my hair like this. The biggest shift in that was the story we were telling the customer, and the story we were learning to share as salespeople in that department is what caused the transformation. The story I was telling myself about my worth and whatnot is what changed me physically. Now, that was 1985 to December of 1986 when I was promoted yet again to train the very first training and development director for that chain of department stores, to translate what I had done within one store to all 10 stores and then help open a new store. I got comfortable in that career. It became about practicality versus calling. I stayed because it was safe. I found myself slowly disconnecting from what I wanted to do, and I had the opportunity to go back to school then, but chose not to because I thought this was the thing. I was in my well, actually, it was 40 years ago. 1986 was 40 years ago. I stayed in that comfort space with various different companies until 2014. And the reason I walked away was because my husband and I realized we didn't need to be in survival mode anymore. I didn't have to work. I could take time to figure out who I was again and what I wanted to do. Now, not everyone has that opportunity. Not like that. But when we find ourselves slowly disconnecting from ourselves or our partners or our families or our friends or the people we work with, and we're not paying attention, we can stay in this cycle of comfort. When Dan allowed me to walk away from the job I had, that was becoming quite toxic, actually, the company I was working with was quite toxic. I began to relax, sleep, didn't realize how tired I had been, and could start to hear that whisper inside of me. And interestingly enough, it was the same whisper I had had when I worked with those at-risk homeless youth. The whisper didn't disappear simply because I ignored it. It was because I was too busy to hear it. There are other things that happened on that path, and I share a lot more stories in my memoir that will be coming out later this year. But the biggest thing was the myth of readiness. That was a repeated theme. It wasn't until I walked away from that last job that clarity did not come until I moved away from, until I began taking different steps, taking a different path. During that time, I took a part-time job with a bank, still kind of retail, but it was different, gave me a different perspective. I wasn't responsible anymore. In the retail positions I'd had, I was responsible. I was the one that if we didn't do well, it was on my shoulders. If we did great, I had to give it to someone else. That part-time job was not that big a deal. And then I thought, maybe my dad was right, and maybe I should try insurance. So I tried a couple of insurance agencies. And then my husband was diagnosed with cancer. And it was his second cancer diagnosis. And I realized that I really needed to begin making bigger steps towards whatever it was that I wanted to do. I took another full-time job. This one, though, allowed me to work from home. It paid great. It was a sales position with a local cruise line, and I made a lot of money during that time period. And I also then began to go back and work on some internal stuff. And I began to find my confidence again and taking bigger steps through the courageous actions that I tried. Sign up for a class here or sign up for a class here that would cause some vulnerability and exposure of some of the things I was feeling and desiring. What I learned was that readiness was not a feeling. So one of the questions I asked is, what if the path becomes clear by walking it? And it does. At least that's what I've learned. I learned that the next right step often only becomes visible after we take the step right before it. So I began to ask the question, what small courageous steps actually look like? Things that I began to do are saying yes to my creativity, participating in community theater, participating in small group activities that had me reflecting and meditating and diving deep into looking at and listening to that still voice within. Also, rest, honoring my moments of rest, setting boundaries, learning that no was a complete sentence with a period, speaking my truth, and being honest with myself, creating community. From the time period of 2014 to 2021, I found myself getting to know and meeting different people than I'd ever met before. In fact, a couple of the people that I met and interacted with are still my friends now. But if I go back in time to when I was doing well in my retail work, there are not very many of those people still in my life. I also learned to let myself want more and began to go back to those big dreams. Not the dreams with boundaries like my mother had, but the big dreams, the asking what if questions. And allowing myself to be seen. Starting this podcast is a huge leap at allowing myself to be seen. I was scared to death of this. This was something I was told I should do in January of 2020. In fact, I took a boot camp on visibility back then, able to record myself. And I could never watch myself back. No. What I've learned since 2020 is that transformation rarely begins with one dramatic leap. It begins with small, brave choices repeated over time. To get to here right now, today, on this podcast, I had to do those 15 seconds, those 30 seconds, those 1 minute, those 1.5, hello, hi, whatnots on Facebook. Some of which I never shared. They're still on my computer somewhere. And I look back at that person and realize that I was there all the time. I just was afraid to show myself to the world. I also learned that I had to stay connected to my body, my heart, and my hara, my power center, my lower dantian. I learned that for a good portion of my life, I lived from my left neck up. It was all thinking. It was constant mental management. It was overthinking. It was my nervous system. exhausted from holding everything down. And I was completely disconnected from my intuition. I think it was somewhere in late 2020. I took a 3-day weekend event that was amazing. I learned about meditation. I learned about a certain kind of meditation. And in that, I started to recognize my inner voice and my intuition again. It was then that I made the decision that I wanted to teach this to other people. Now, that was a scary proposition because that meant I would have to expose myself to the world and what I had experienced and how I'd gotten there. But I learned that sometimes the next courageous step is not doing more. Sometimes it's becoming present enough to hear myself. So I listened to that and I began to dream. And it was a small dream. It was a small dream. And that dream has grown. You know, I am not one to walk into a room of strangers and start introducing myself. I am what one might call an introvert, although there's this new term nowadays where it's an intro extrovert, where in given situations you are not an introvert, you're an extrovert, and so on and so forth. I'm leaning more towards that nowadays because I have learned that in order to really connect to another person, you have to be connected to yourself. So listening, though, to yourself is only the beginning. You have to learn to take steps, but it starts with listening. I have learned, 2020, I was 50 in 2020. Is that right? Yes. No. I turned 60, so I was 59. I was 59 in 2020. It took me 59 years to get to that point. And if I can do it at 59, you are not too late. Your longing is not foolish. The whisper inside, that inner voice, that pull, that longing may actually be guiding you home, back to yourself. Listening inward matters, but eventually life asks you to participate. So the turning point for me happened a year later when I was faced with a decision at a job that I had, a full-time job, and a coach mentor I had. The coach mentor said, "What would it take for you to walk away from that job? Because that job is not bringing you joy. That's not what you were put on this planet for," which, to be honest with you, is 100% correct. And I said, I probably need to have X number of clients. And, I had a couple of medical things I had to take care of, like I had to have 2 hips replaced. I need to have those taken care of, and then I can focus. So she said, "Okay, pick a date." Pick a date to have the clients in line and have the surgeries done. That was in March of 2021. July, I officially started my business. By the end of August, I had had both of my hips replaced, and I had enough clients. And I had a query at work, and depending on how the query was answered, was going to determine how much longer I was going to stay there. The query at work never got given an answer by the only person that could answer it. That was an indicator to me that my value was non-existent in that job. So I gave my notice. Now, the interesting thing is, since COVID, the people in our department, the day they give their notice is usually their last day. So I gave my notice at 5 p.m., the time that the department closes, on a Thursday. And my husband, assuming that this particular company was like most, I would be off in 2 weeks. Now, this was after September 1st. I did that on purpose. And by 11 o'clock the next morning, I was done. I have done a couple of things since then for money, but only things that I choose to do that feel like they fit with who I am. This past year, I worked with a middle school directing 30 students in a play and 8 students on crew, because that felt like where I needed to be. I became the managing artistic director for a small community theater. I coach actors and writers and directors. And I work with women who, like me, are looking for leaning into their life so that they can spend the rest of their days living it the way they want. I help them design their life, create their life, write the screenplay for their own life for the rest of their lives. So my question to you is, what courageous step might your life be asking of you right now? What are you being pulled to, called to, pushed to? If you're not aware, or you think you know, it takes time to sit quietly and listen. Take just a moment right now and put your feet on the floor. And if you're sitting in a chair, straighten your back up. If you're standing, check your posture. Feet shoulder width apart. Stand up tall. Put one hand on your belly and one hand on your heart. I like right on heart, left on belly. Soften your gaze and take a deep breath in as you ground to the earth. Try and take your attention to just behind your eyes in the center of your head, allowing your brain and your mental mind chatter to quiet for just a moment. Know that you do not need to have the answer to what right now. You only need to have the willingness to take a moment to listen, become aware, and ask, what is the next small step for me? Every Saturday this past month, I have spent 30 minutes in a quiet, safe space, meditatively, to look at that. This Saturday, I have another. You are welcome to come. There is no cost for that. It is just a space. You don't need to say anything. You may if you wish, but you don't need to say anything. And I will guide you into quietness so that you can listen. The link for that will be in the show notes, as is the link to my memoir, which comes out later this year, that will have more about my story and a little bit about the work that I do. And if you'd like to reach out to me, I have included my email address as well. Thank you so much for being here today. I am excited as I head into the next couple of months, as I will be inviting new friends to sit here and have a conversation with me about the creative connection, how they made the connection to their lives that they have now, and what they do to help others connect to the life that they passionately want to live. I wish you much, much happiness and blessings on this next week. Thank you for being here.